So it's quarterback week on Panther-Lair.com. Jim is breaking down the quarterback position from all angles all week long. He started yesterday. Moving through each day of the week, we'll have a different kind of approach or angle to the quarterback position. This really kicks off our position previews for the 2025 football season, since we're about 10 weeks away from the start of training camp. We kind of count this thing back and figure out how far it is, and when we get to the 10-week out from camp point, then we start this. We go through 10 positions: quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, O-line, D tackle, linebacker, corner, safety. No love for the specialists, and we apologize to them. We love them very much, but we don't always do a deep dive on the position preview because there's not as much material to work with there. But we start our position previews this week, of course, with quarterback. You always start right there. And we kind of each day has a different topic and a different theme. And so, inevitably there's going to be one or two morning pits each week to kind of relate to that position group. Whatever position group we're highlighting and featuring, we're inevitably going to have some conversations. And so today, I wanted to talk about quarterbacks. We talked a lot about the basketball team yesterday, and we'll probably dig more into that as the as the days and the weeks and the months go by, heading into summer and moving through the summer as they add more players to the roster, which I think they will do. But I wanted to talk about football because I was thinking about the quarterback position and about Pitt's situation with quarterbacks and what it's been over the last 10 years under Pat Narduzzi. The sort of mix of high school recruits and transfers that they've brought in, the success they've had with each of those groups, what has worked, what hasn't. And there's a lot of different angles to it. And, sometimes with these morning pits, I sit down, I've got a topic in mind. Like, I already know what the headline on the video is going to be. You know what I mean? I already know what we're going to put on the thumbnail there and what we're going to put on the front page at Panther-Lair.com when we publish this video. And other times I just sort of have like the topic in mind and sit down and say, well, we're gonna talk about this for a little bit. And sometimes I even do quite a bit of research. Like, here, look at all these stats, huh? Look at this legal pad page full of stats. I don't know why I couldn't fill this section right there, but we got a lot of stats about the quarterback position. What I have to decide, sorry, I moved all my things around to put the legal pad on screen. What I have to decide is what our angle is going to be here. Because my first thought was, how was I going to say it? It wasn't, does Pitt have a quarterback problem? I think it was going to be, can Pat Narduzzi recruit a quarterback? But that seems a little bit harsh. Still, there's an interesting conversation to be had here, I think, as we look at what Pitt's quarterbacks have done over the last 10 seasons, where they've come from, who has produced for Pitt, who has been, come in as a evaluated, recruited, and developed high school prospect, and who has come in as a transfer, and how each of those groups have produced and what they've gotten, what Pitt has gotten out of each of those groups. So we got a lot of stats, we got a lot of numbers, we're going to get into a lot of anecdotes and my memory of these quarterbacks and your memory of these quarterbacks. We're going to try and figure out what has gone on, and in some cases what has gone wrong with the quarterback position at Pitt over the last 10 years under Pat Narduzzi. There's a lot of different angles to pursue, a lot of different things to talk about, a lot of names that maybe it'll be a little bit of, going down memory lane. You'll be like, oh, that guy. I forgot about that guy, and I had no need to remember him. Well, you're going to remember some of these guys today on the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You know the website. You see it below, Panther-Lair.com. It's a Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network where we cover everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, transfer portal, all those things. We provide the coverage and content every single day. And then you, the Pitt fans, hang out on the message boards and talk about Pitt sports. All day long, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. talking about what's going on in the world of Pitt sports. I think it's the best source, the best online Pitt community that you're going to find. If you're a Pitt fan, you want to hang out with other Pitt fans, you want to talk to other Pitt fans, that's the place to do it, Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have new Pitt video content for you virtually every day. We have these morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We have our weekly live stream. We'll do that tomorrow night, Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett get together with you and talk a little Pitt sports. And then we have post-game shows and press conferences and interviews and all kinds of things right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So anytime we talk about Pitt's quarterbacks under Pat Narduzzi, an inevitable part of the conversation and something we cannot ignore and we can't leave out is the changing of the offensive coordinators. I mean, like, that's an essential part of this. And when we talk about, like, part of my list here that I have written down on this legal pad that I waved in the air a few minutes ago, part of it is the coordinators who signed each of these guys. But it's not entirely accurate. Like, Matt Canada signed Thomas McVitie, but Thomas McVitie was recruited by Jim Chaney. You know, he ultimately signed when Matt Canada had already been hired and Jim Chaney had left to go to Georgia because that was back when signing day was in February, which was the fashion at the time. And Matt Canada, so he was the offensive coordinator who signed Thomas McVitie, but he wasn't the guy who actually recruited Thomas McVitie. Similarly, Matt Canada was the offensive coordinator who recruited Kenny Pickett, but he didn't sign Kenny Pickett. Sean Watson signed Kenny Pickett, although that by that point, I forget if they had a December. I think they had a December signing day. No, but Kenny Pickett enrolled early anyway, so he had to make his decision a little bit early. But again, he was recruited by Matt Canada, but ultimately Sean Watson was the offensive coordinator when Kenny Pickett was a freshman. Fast forward, Davis Bevel was a Sean Watson recruit in the 2019 recruiting class, who ultimately signed with Mark Whipple, who had been hired, right? Frank Signetti, well, there was nobody. Whipple didn't recruit anybody for the 2022 recruiting class, and so Frank Signetti didn't sign anybody that year when he was in his first year, but Frank Signetti did recruit Julian Duggar, and Cade Bell was the offensive coordinator who signed him. So to some extent, is Duggar a Bell recruit? Sure, in the sense that Bell was the offensive coordinator when Duggar signed in December of 2023, but that's not the coordinator who recruited him. And ditto for Kenny Pickett, got recruited by Matt Canada. Thomas McVitie got recruited by Jim Chaney. So I think the important thing to keep in mind about the coordinators is that they have changed all the time. Pat Narduzzi's had 6 offensive coordinators in 10 seasons. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. And an incredible amount of instability and change at a coaching position that is arguably the most important coaching position on the staff. Outside of the head coach, the offensive coordinator is probably the most important position on the staff, particularly on this staff where the head coach is a defensive coordinator. And he might not be the defensive coordinator, but he is a defensive coordinator. And so even if you change defensive coordinators every year, I don't think it's going to upend your defensive system or your scheme or your stability all that much because you've still got Pat Narduzzi in the office, right? Whereas the offensive side, you're changing it. I mean, they had a new offensive coordinator every one of the first 3 years. That's hard to establish stability. They had 3 offensive coordinators in 4 years from 2021 through 2024. It's hard to establish stability. It's hard to establish consistency. And maybe that's part of the reason that some of these offenses haven't worked all that well. One of the things I jotted down on my chart here was the passing touchdowns each season. And the number of times that Pitt has been in the teens in passing touchdowns for a season under Pat Narduzzi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 10 seasons. In the mid-2000 teens through the mid-2020s. And you're running passing offenses out there 6 out of 10 times that don't even get 20 passing touchdowns. That's a whole other episode. We could do a whole other episode about that. And maybe some of it is about, due to the change of offensive coordinators, you're upending things. I mean, they went from Matt Canada with 28 passing touchdowns and all the rushing touchdowns in 2016 to Sean Watson had 12 passing touchdowns in 2017. And he only had 12 the next year when they played 14 games. 14 games, and they only had 12 passing touchdowns. Now, that team ran for 3,000 rushing yards, but still, you averaged less than one passing touchdown per game. 2019, Mark Whipple's first year, they went up to 17 passing touchdowns. 2020, they had 14 passing touchdowns. They only played 11 games. 14 passing touchdowns in 11 games is still pretty bad. 2022, they went a straight 1-for-1. 13 passing touchdowns in 13 games. It's almost a miracle that team won 9 games. And then 2023, when they only won 3 games, they threw 17 passing touchdowns. That's pretty pathetic. To have 10 seasons and only one of them you had more than 30 passing touchdowns. I would have to go over the stats for all all the teams across the country to see how that compares. But to me, it seems like in 2020, anywhere from 2015 on, you should probably have multiple seasons with 30-plus passing touchdowns if you're a competent, effective offense, which clearly a lot of the times Pitt has not been. Now, they also had less than 3,000 passing yards, basically in all but 3 seasons. 2019, they went over 3,000 passing yards. Obviously, 2021, they almost had 5,000 passing yards. And then this past year, they had 3,400, almost 3,500 passing yards. And so the numbers started rebounding this year with Cade Bell's emphasis on the pass. And to some extent, you're talking about philosophical things. Cade Bell's offense went for almost 3,500 yards and 29 touchdowns. So you're seeing something more in line with probably what you need to be able to do in 2025 to win games. But there have been some pretty mediocre passing offenses. But we're not here to talk about those offenses, even though we just did for a few minutes. It's about the recruiting versus the transfers and whether Pitt is getting what they need out of the quarterback position or what they've gotten from the quarterback position since 2015. A couple quick numbers for you. In 10 seasons, Pitt has had almost 30,000 passing yards, 28,897. 30,000 passing yards, around 200 passing touchdowns, 207 total, in 128 games. What's interesting is when you break down the quarterbacks, the starting quarterbacks, and we're just going to go with quarterbacks who made a start. I'm not going to get into everybody who threw a single pass because we get into Jared Wayne and Brian O'Neill and all this different stuff. It's the quarterbacks who made a start in these 128 games, right? 66 of those 128 starts came from high school recruits. 62 came from transfers. So you're almost a dead even split over the course of 10 seasons where you had 50, almost 52% of your games were started by high school recruits. And obviously the vast majority of that is Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett started 49 out of those 66 games. That's about 74% of the games that were started by high school recruits. They came from Kenny Pickett. So you basically either had Kenny Pickett starting for 5 years or 4 years really is what he ended up being. Or you had a transfer starting for the rest of the time. More or less what it boils down to. High school recruits, Ben DiNucci started 6 games. Nate Yarnell started 5. Nick Patty started 3. Chad Wojcik started the first 2 games of the Narduzzi era. It wasn't technically a Narduzzi recruit. I mean, I don't even need to add technically. He wasn't a Narduzzi recruit, but he did start games under Narduzzi. And then, of course, David Lynch got a start. Don't forget David Lynch in his one start in the Toledo Bowl game. Maybe if that game had been started by a recruit, a scholarship recruit, like, Julian Duggar, maybe that game ends up a win instead of a loss. But it's another conversation altogether, too. On the transfer side, the bulk of the numbers were put up by Nate Peterman. He started 24 games, threw for 5,000 yards out of the 13,000 that transfers have thrown for at Pitt, and threw for 47 touchdowns, more than half of the passing touchdowns that transfers have thrown at Pitt under Pat Narduzzi. Now, under Pat Narduzzi, transfers have thrown 93 touchdown passes. Like I say, 47 of those came from Nate Peterman. 17 from Eli Holstein, 10 from Keaton Slovis, everybody else in the single digits on the passing touchdown side. So you have a slight advantage for the high school recruits, where the high school recruits accounted for 52% of the passing touchdowns thrown at Pitt since Pat Narduzzi became head coach. The transfers accounted for 44.9%. You kind of balance that out. 93 touchdowns for the transfers, 108 for the high school kids. Now, of course, again, of those 108, touchdown passes that were thrown by high school kids, Kenny Pickett accounted for 81 of them, which is almost, it's about 75%. So here again, you end up finding yourself in a situation where the high school recruits put up more numbers than the transfers, but almost exclusively Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett had 12,000 career passing yards. Pitt's high school recruited quarterbacks accounted for 16,000. So that's 76% of the passing yards that high school recruits have thrown in the last 10 seasons for Pitt. Kenny Pickett's got 76% of them. The rest of the guys, Chad Wojtek had about 100 yards in his 2 starts at the beginning of the 2015 season. Nate Yarnell ended up with about 1,800, kind of bulked his numbers up this past season. Ben DiNucci went over 1,000 yards. He had about 1,100 passing yards. Nick Patty had 783. David Lynch chipped in 65. Kenny Pickett, 12,000. And so I guess if there's an ultimate takeaway here, it's that they have basically hit on one high school recruit at quarterback. And it's Kenny Pickett. And, jury's still out on Mason Heinschel. Obviously, we're not including him in this conversation because he hasn't played a game yet. Even though we hear a lot of really positive things, we hear good things about how he's playing, and he looks like he's going to be really good. Maybe he can push for playing time this year. I also think that the ceiling was pretty high for Julian Duggar, and it's unfortunate that he left because maybe he could have had a chance to do something here. But the high school guys who have stuck it out for any amount of time, it's pretty much Kenny Pickett, and he's the only guy. 12,000 passing yards, 81 passing touchdowns, 49 starts. Nobody else comes close to that number. Nate Yarnell had 1,800 yards and 15 touchdowns. Now, in the transfers, what's interesting is you get more success, I think, when you look at it. Nate Peterman leads the charge. He threw for 5,000 yards at Pitt, 47 touchdowns at Pitt. But, Keaton Slovis threw for almost 2,400 yards and 10 touchdowns in 2022. Eli Holstein threw for 2,200 yards and 17 touchdowns. Christian Vayer threw for 1,100, almost 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. So whereas on the recruit side, you have Pickett with 12,000 yards and nobody else with more than 1,800. On the transfer side, you've got Nate Peterman with 5,000 yards and then a couple of guys who threw for more than 2,000 yards in one season each. And so, we could debate about, was Keaton Slovis a hit or not? Did that one work? He threw for 2,000 yards. He led them to, a 9-4 season. He had 7 wins as a starter because they got 1 win in the Western Michigan game when he was out, and they got 1 win in the bowl game after he'd already left the team. But during the regular season, he led them to a 7-4 record. It's admirable. That's roughly what Eli Holstein did. Pitt was 7-3 with Eli Holstein as a starter. And, I think you would take that over, what you got from Nick Patty, Nate Yarnell, Chad Wojtek, Ben DiNucci, Thomas McVitie, Davis Bevel, Ty Diefenbach. I think they've had more success with the transfers and with more guys. You might have gotten better numbers overall from the high school group, but that's because you got better numbers overall from that guy right there who popped up on the screen, Kenny Pickett. Whereas the transfers, you got comparable numbers. Again, the transfers accounted for 44% of the passing yards in the last 10 years and 45% of the passing touchdowns in the last 10 years. So you got comparable numbers spread over more guys. Now, I guess we have to wrap this somehow. We have to put a bow on this, right? What's the takeaway? Well, one of the takeaways would be they've had one good high school recruit at quarterback. One guy who actually panned out and played well. And again, we'll see. Maybe Ty Diefenbach goes off and has a great career. Maybe Julian Duggar goes off and has a great career. Maybe Nate Yarnell does well this year, right? Most of these other guys, the book is closed on them. And we'll see what happens with Mason Heinschel coming in. But through 10 years, through 10 years of quarterback play, the only high school recruit who has really elevated this team was Kenny Pickett. Whereas on the transfer side, I think you can make a good case that they were better for having Nate Peterman, they were better for having Keaton Slovis, and they were better for having Eli Holstein. So does that mean you should abandon the high school recruiting altogether? No, I don't think so. But I think what it shows is the almost incredible amount of available talent that's out there in the transfer portal. That you can find guys, that you can go bring guys in, and particularly the position of quarterback, rather than recruiting a guy and spending a year developing him and then he transfers off to the West Coast or something, or rather than spending a couple years developing him and then he leaves when he doesn't think he's going to be the starter, you can go get your starter from the transfer portal. You can go get a guy to come in and start right now out of the portal with these older veteran players. Maybe that's the conclusion. I don't know. What do you take from this? Does Pitt have a quarterback problem? Does Pat Narduzzi struggle to recruit good quarterbacks? Is the changing guard, the constant change of the offensive coordinator, how much of a problem is that? Maybe that makes it a little bit easier not easier to succeed with transfers, but it gives you, it makes it harder to succeed with the high school guys. And so maybe some of these guys aren't really getting a fair shake because they just, the coordinators change all the time and it's hard to keep up with that. What do you make of all of it? What do you make of Pitt's quarterback situation over the last 10 years? It's certainly unique from, say, like the safety spot, right? Where they've had really good players at safety, a lot of success, NFL players, guys really achieving and playing well. And it's been a lot of guys, every 2 years or so, you get new guys cycling in there and they're playing well and doing well, as opposed to the quarterback position where you've got a lot of success, but it's kind of all one guy, at least out of the high school ranks. What do you make of it? What's your take on the quarterback situation with Pat Narduzzi? Over 10 years of data and info, and I think I got through every stat that I had written down, which doesn't always happen. But, all right, let me know what you think in the comments or on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. What do you make of Pitt's quarterback recruiting situation? Not just this year, but over 10 years. All right, go to Panther-Lair.com and post your remarks there. We'll have a little conversation about it. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network. Thanks very much for tuning in today. Glad we could hang out and catch up. We'll put up our post today on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com to get questions for this week's mailbag, so make sure you get in there. And I think that's about it. So I hope your week got off to a great start. Enjoy your Tuesday, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.